Before the Dragon Emperor's name echoed through the stars, before the empires burned and the heavens trembled, there was silence. In the beginning, the dragons of Dravenar were not conquerors, they were survivors. Born in the cores of suns, they lived by one rule: only the strong endure. From that creed came Cast, the Undying. His wings blotted out the light of worlds. His roar silenced fleets. His empire, the Tristar Dominion, spanned 3 systems bound by oath and flame. For 1,000 years, he ruled through power so absolute that mercy became a forgotten word. Yet even gods can feel hollow. When the Empress Lithera died, giving birth to their son, the Emperor sealed his heart as he had sealed her tomb. He built walls against grief, forged his sorrow into strength, and taught his heir to do the same. Love was weakness. Compassion was death. But the stars have a way of whispering to those who forget how to listen. Somewhere, light years away, on a small blue planet filled with fragile hearts and soft songs, a girl was learning a melody that would one day break the silence of the Dragon Empire. And when their paths crossed, the fire that once devoured worlds would learn to burn for something greater. It would learn to warm. They called him Cast the Undying, the Dragon Emperor, the flame that burned across galaxies. His name alone could silence fleets and make worlds bow. For centuries, his empire of fire had consumed the stars, one system after another, until even the bravest races whispered his name in fear. The dragons of Dravenar were not myths. They were living titans, creatures forged in the hearts of suns. Their wings could shatter sound barriers. Their breath could melt warships. When they flew, the heavens trembled, and at their head soared Cast, the immortal ruler who united his kind through strength and burned weakness out of existence. He believed compassion was poison. He believed mercy invited death. In the old dragon tongue, the word for love was the same as the word for pain. Those who cared too deeply, it was said, would inevitably burn. And Cast had believed that truth for nearly 1,000 years. But even an immortal emperor is not immune to loneliness. When his mate, Empress Lithera, died giving birth to their son, something inside him cracked, and the sound of that fracture echoed through eternity. He vowed that his child, Prince Viron, would never know fear, never need softness, never depend on the fragile emotions that had destroyed him. He taught the boy to breathe fire before he learned to speak. He taught him command before comfort. When Viron cried in the night, the emperor did not come. Instead, he ordered the walls of the royal chambers sealed, soundproof, unyielding, perfect in their silence. And so, the child of fire grew in the echo of power and absence. Far above the blazing world of Dravenar, the stars looked cold and distant. The emperor often stood at his palace balcony, staring into that endless dark. The galaxies glittered like frozen embers. They did not sing to him as they once had. Even victory had become hollow. There, in the silence of the stars, Cast the Undying began to wonder, without ever daring to admit it, if all his power had bought him nothing but ashes. Then came the call that would change everything. A galactic council summit on a station called Haven's Rest, a place built by humans, tiny, fragile creatures who somehow survived among the stars. The Emperor would attend, not out of curiosity, but to remind the galaxy who ruled its fire. He did not yet know that among the billions awaiting his arrival, there was one human whose voice could pierce even an emperor's silence. And her name was Maya Rodriguez. Haven's Rest shimmered between 3 suns, a miracle of glass, metal, and fragile peace. It was humanity's proudest creation, an orbital city where hundreds of alien species met under a single promise: no war, no conquest, no fire. To most, it was a dream. To Maya Rodriguez, it was survival. Her brother was dying back home on Earth, and the medicine he needed cost more than her family would ever earn in a lifetime. So she came here, to the edge of the stars, to scrub dishes and serve drinks in a restaurant high above the void. 6 months of service, the contract said, and she could buy him time, maybe even hope. She worked at the Stellar Garden, the most elegant dining hall on the station. Its walls were transparent crystal, its floors veined with light that shifted like water. There, Maya polished plates until she could see her reflection in them. She was small among giants, both figuratively and literally. Politicians, soldiers, and alien nobles filled the tables, all speaking in tongues she barely understood. When the announcement came that the Dragon Emperor himself would attend the summit, the air of Haven's Rest changed. Soldiers rehearsed security drills. Engineers scrubbed the corridors with laser brushes. The Stellar Garden staff were told in hushed tones that one mistake could doom them all. Maya laughed nervously at first. A Dragon Emperor? It sounded like myth. But when she looked out the viewport and saw his ship descending, a golden-black leviathan with wings of burning plasma, her breath caught in her throat. The ship moved like a living creature, its scales reflecting entire constellations. The docking bay trembled as it arrived. The temperature rose by 10 degrees. The station's air filters whined, and then he stepped through the airlock. The Dragon Emperor was colossal, his obsidian scales shimmering with molten veins of gold. His eyes glowed like twin suns. When he spoke, his voice didn't just echo, it vibrated in the bones of everyone who heard him. Around him, armored guards bowed so low their foreheads touched the floor. Behind him walked a smaller figure, Prince Viron, a young dragonling with silver scales, no larger than a human child. He looked around in wide-eyed fear, clutching at his father's tail as if the crowd might swallow him whole. Maya froze behind the serving counter, watching them take their seats. The Emperor's presence filled the room like gravity. Even breathing felt dangerous. Yet, as she watched the prince hide his face, something inside her softened. She saw not a creature of myth, but a child who didn't understand the world around him. When the meal began, Maya kept her eyes down, her steps quiet. But as she passed by the imperial table, the prince's gaze met hers. His golden eyes flickered, curiosity mixed with fear. She offered him a small, nervous smile, just a tiny kindness. And then she felt it. The Emperor's gaze fell upon her. It wasn't just looking, it was knowing. A piercing awareness that seemed to see through her skin, into her thoughts, her memories, her heart. For a heartbeat, she forgot to breathe. Then, just as suddenly, he looked away. The air seemed to rush back into the room. She didn't know why her chest ached when he did. That night, as the restaurant emptied and the stars burned beyond the glass, Maya leaned against the counter and whispered to herself, he looked like a god. And in the shadows, far above her pay grade, the fate of an empire shifted, ever so slightly, toward a human girl who did not yet understand what she was about to change. The night of the summit arrived, and Haven's Rest gleamed brighter than ever before. Dignitaries from across the galaxy gathered in the Stellar Garden, their voices a symphony of alien tongues and nervous laughter. The air shimmered with tension and wealth, with the weight of politics and power. At the head of the grand hall sat the Dragon Emperor, silent and still, his vast presence enough to quiet even the most arrogant rulers. The light from the station's suns caught the edges of his scales, sending gold and crimson reflections dancing across the walls. Beside him, the young Prince Viron sat as rigid as a statue, his tiny claws gripping the table's edge. The meal began. Toasts were raised. Speeches filled the air, long and ceremonial. Maya moved quietly among the tables, her tray steady though her heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at her to stay invisible, but her eyes kept drifting toward the small dragon prince. He looked terrified. His plate was untouched. His wings twitched every time someone laughed too loudly. Then came the sound, a soft whimper, at first almost lost beneath the clinking of glasses. Then louder, a trembling cry that made the light fixtures flicker. The young prince was crying. It was not the gentle cry of a child. It was a sound that vibrated through the air, deep and primal. The temperature in the room began to climb. Steam curled from his mouth as tears hit the table, sizzling into smoke. The Emperor rose to his feet. The sound of his movement silenced the room. "Everyone stay back," he ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. But the prince's crying only grew. The crystal walls quivered. Plates rattled. The air itself seemed to shimmer with heat. Panic swept the hall. Ambassadors stumbled back. Guards drew their weapons, and waiters dropped their trays as the young dragon's sobs became roars. And then, through the chaos, Maya moved. No one noticed her at first. She slipped between the scattering guests, her feet carrying her toward the source of the fire. Her heart raced, but something deeper, older, pushed her forward. "Stop," the Emperor warned, his voice no longer angry, but uncertain. She didn't stop. She knelt in front of the dragon child, close enough to feel the waves of heat rolling from his trembling scales. His eyes blazed gold and wet with fear. "Hey," she whispered softly. "You're far from home, huh? Everything looks strange. Smells strange. But it's okay. You're not alone." The Emperor stared, frozen, as this small human dared to speak to his son. No, to touch him. Maya reached out her hand, trembling but steady, and then she began to sing. Her voice was quiet, fragile at first, but it carried. The sound filled the air like light spilling into darkness. Under starlight, soft and bright. Close your eyes and rest tonight. Though you're far from all you know, gentle dreams will help you grow. The words were simple, old, an earth lullaby her grandmother used to hum during thunderstorms. The translation programs couldn't capture its meaning, but emotion doesn't need translation. The song floated over the flames, soft and sure. Slowly, the young dragon's breathing steadied. The sparks faded. The tremors in his wings eased. His golden eyes blinked at her through tears, curious now instead of afraid. When the last note faded, silence filled the hall. The mighty dragon prince, the air of flame and fury, leaned toward the small human and made a soft, vibrating sound. He purred. The air in the room seemed to exhale. The Emperor's expression was unreadable. For the first time in his immortal life, he had been powerless before his own child. And this human, this fragile creature of flesh and breath, had calmed what fire could not. "What is that magic?" he asked quietly. Maya looked up at him, still holding the prince's small claw. "It's called a lullaby," she said. "We use them to help our children feel safe." The Emperor said nothing. His gaze lingered on her face for a long, long moment, as if trying to understand something that had no name. And when he turned away, something in him had already begun to change. In the days that followed the summit, the story spread like wildfire through Haven's Rest. The human waitress who had soothed the dragon prince. The one whose voice had quieted fire itself. Every species whispered about it, wondering whether it had been courage, insanity, or some unknown human magic. For Maya, life returned to routine, or as close as it could. But every day, the same strange thing happened. The Emperor returned. Officially, he said it was for diplomatic meetings. Unofficially, everyone knew it was for her. He would take the same seat in the stellar garden, silent as stone, while his son sat beside him with bright, eager eyes. And when Maya passed by, the prince would chirp and wave his tiny claws, begging for another song. At first, Maya was nervous. How do you sing for gods? But Viron's laughter made it easy. She hummed softly as she worked, and he followed her voice like sunlight. The Emperor watched, always watched. He studied her as if trying to decipher a language written in heartbeats. Days passed. The great cast the Undying began to ask questions no one had ever dared voice. "Tell me about these songs," he said one evening as she refilled his glass. Maya hesitated but sat across from him when he gestured for her to. The entire staff froze in disbelief. No one sat at the table of the Dragon Emperor. "They're lullabies," she said quietly. "We sing them to help our children sleep, to remind them that the dark isn't something to fear." The Emperor tilted his head, his golden eyes reflecting her small form. "You use sound to comfort the weak?" "Not to comfort the weak," she corrected gently. "To remind them they're loved." He fell silent. The concept itself seemed to puzzle him, like a new law of physics he couldn't yet accept. "And you believe love is strength?" he asked at last. Maya looked at the young prince, who was now tracing her shadow on the floor with a tiny claw. "I believe love is the only thing that gives strength meaning," she said. The Emperor did not reply, but for the first time in his long life, he questioned what strength really was. That night, alone in his quarters, Cass stood before the window, staring into the void between stars. His reflection glimmered faintly on the glass, half god, half ghost. And somewhere in the echo of memory, he heard the lullaby. Soft, human, unconquerable. 3 days later, the galaxy reminded them how fragile peace could be. Without warning, alarms screamed through Haven's Rest. The floor shook. Sirens wailed. The station had come under attack. Pirates, mercenaries who hunted the rich and powerful, drawn like moths to the brightest flame, the Dragon Emperor himself. Maya was asleep in her quarters when the first explosion hit. She bolted upright as the lights flickered red. Over the intercom came the order to evacuate. She grabbed her bag, ready to run for the shelters, when she heard it, A cry, faint and terrified, echoing down the corridor. Prince Viron. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, but she ran the other way. The corridor was chaos. Smoke, fire, cries for help. She found the prince pinned under a collapsed beam, his silver scales smeared with soot, his small body trembling. "It's okay, Viron," she said, coughing as she tried to lift the metal. It didn't budge. "We'll get out, I promise." His eyes widened with panic. Sparks spilled from his mouth. Maya did the only thing she could. She sang. Her voice cracked from smoke, but the melody carried through the flames. "Mother's love will find you here. Chase away each worry and fear. Close your eyes, the world will stay, and morning light will find your way." The prince's sobs slowed. He looked at her, listening. She pressed her palms to the metal. "We have to push together," she said. "Come on, little one. You're strong. I know you are." Viron nodded, determination flickering in his golden eyes. Fire erupted from his mouth, and together they heaved. The beam shifted. He crawled free, but the ceiling above them cracked. The air filled with a deafening roar. Without thinking, Maya threw herself over the prince. The world collapsed. Pain tore through her back. Then, silence. When Cast arrived moments later, the corridors were in ruins. He tore through steel like paper until he found them. His sun curled around the unconscious human, his wings shielding her broken form. The emperor knelt. His claws shook as he touched her face. "She saved you," he whispered to Viron. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the dragon emperor wept. He carried Maya himself to the medical bay. The doctors said she would live. When they told him that, the emperor's exhale sounded like thunder breaking after a storm. 2 days later, Maya opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the emperor sitting beside her bed, his scales dimmed, his armor dented. His gaze, once as hard as molten gold, had softened. "You risked your life for my son," he said quietly. "Why?" Maya smiled weakly. "Because he needed someone," she whispered. "Children shouldn't have to be afraid." The emperor's voice was low, uncertain. "You speak of courage as if it were kindness. Among my kind, courage means domination." Maya's eyes met his. "Maybe you've been teaching the wrong kind of courage." Her words hung in the air between them like a spark suspended in darkness. And in that silence, something inside Cast, the undying fire, the unyielding ruler, finally began to change. When Maya was strong enough to walk again, the emperor came to her. He entered without guards, his massive frame filling the doorway of the medbay. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice quieter than she had ever heard from him, he asked her to come with him. Not as a servant, not as a prisoner, but as a teacher. "You have shown me a strength I did not know existed," he said. "Teach it to my son. Teach it to my people." Maya hesitated. She thought of her brother back home, of the life she had left behind. Cast promised her that her family would be cared for, healed, protected beyond anything Earth could provide. He kept his promises. And so, for the first time in history, a human boarded the throne ship of the Dragon Empire as an honored guest. Dravenar was unlike anything she had imagined. A world of fire and metal, skies streaked with burning comets, mountains glowing with rivers of magma. The dragons were endless in size and power. When Maya stepped onto the landing platform, they bowed, not out of reverence, but confusion. Why had their god emperor brought such a small, fragile being to their world? In time, they began to see. She was not a sorceress, not a warrior, not even a noble. She was simply human. But wherever she went, peace followed. She taught the young prince how to control his fire with patience instead of fear. She taught him songs that turned rage into calm. And Cast watched her every day, studying how easily she brought harmony where once there had only been command. He found himself asking her questions he had never asked anyone. What does safety mean? What is gentleness? How can strength protect instead of destroy? Maya's answers were always simple. Strength means nothing if it can't make someone feel safe, she told him. Love doesn't weaken power. It gives it purpose. Under her guidance, the prince began to change. He no longer roared when frightened. He sang. He learned that courage wasn't about dominance, but about trust. And the emperor began to change too. He stopped ordering fear. He started listening. Slowly, word spread across the stars. The Dragon Empire, once known only for conquest, was forming alliances. Worlds that had once trembled at the sight of dragon wings now welcomed them as protectors. 3 months later, the palace gardens of Dravenar were alive with music. The air shimmered with warmth, not fire. Maya stood on a balcony overlooking the glowing landscape, the twin suns sinking low over the horizon. The young prince played among the flowers, his scales reflecting the sunset. Cass stood beside her, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. 3 more worlds joined us today, he said. Voluntarily. Maya smiled. Because they no longer fear you. He turned his gaze toward her. Because they understand us, he said. Because of you. The prince looked up from the garden and began to hum. A simple, familiar melody, the lullaby. His small voice echoed through the halls, pure and bright. Casta's deep tone joined him, rough but steady. Maya laughed softly, her eyes shining. She joined them, her human voice weaving through the dragon harmonies. The song rose into the twilight, carrying through the palace, across the mountains, into the skies. From that night on, the empire itself began to sing. Years passed. Historians would later call it the turning of the flame. They would write that the Dragon Empire had been transformed, not through battle or treaties, but through a single act of compassion. They would tell the story of Maya Rodriguez, the human who sang to a dragon child and changed the fate of an empire. When the emperor's long life finally reached its end, his final words echoed through the great halls of Dravenar. Power can conquer the stars, but love teaches them to shine. Long after Maya was gone, the dragons still sang. Every hatchling, from the smallest to the grandest heir, learned the same human melody. A song about home, about courage born of kindness, about finding peace, even among the stars. And somewhere, in the endless dark between galaxies, the echo of that song still drifts. A soft reminder that even the smallest human voice can quiet the roar of gods. 1,000 years after Maya's voice first reached a dragon's heart, Dravenar still glows in the night sky, brighter than any other world. Travelers say that if you stand on the molten cliffs and listen carefully at dusk, you can hear it, the sound of dragons singing. The songs are ancient now, carried from parent to child, echoing through the mountains like wind over flame. They sing not of conquest, but of comfort, not of fear, but of belonging. The melody has no translation, yet every creature who hears it feels the same thing, peace. In the great hall of flame, beneath banners woven with gold and ash, a statue stands. It shows a human woman kneeling beside a young dragon, her hand on his scaled cheek, her mouth open in song. At her feet are the words once spoken by the emperor himself. Power can conquer the stars, but love teaches them to shine. And beyond Dravenar, far from the empires and their histories, somewhere in the black between galaxies, the song still drifts, faint, endless, eternal. A reminder that even a single human voice can change the destiny of fire.